Welcome back. You're watching The Big Story, and tonight we are talking about that report that was given by the Forest Taskforce today, issued to the CS Environment. And I'm in studio with Dr. Isaac Kalua, who's the chairperson of the Green Africa Foundation, and is also a member of the task force. I'm also with Benson Ochieng, who's an environmental lawyer. And let me start with you, Mr. Ochieng. What is your reaction to this report? And do you think that the task force was formed rather too late? Because it was formed by the DP saying that this was after a 3-year observation of forest cover depletion in the country. Do you think then that this was coming rather too late?
Well, on my take on the report, let me start by a disclaimer. The report came out today. I don't know how comprehensive it is, but I've seen tidbits of it and what I can call a summary, and from what I have heard represented here by my good friend, Dr. Kalua. But let me say this. There are a number of points to take note of. I depart from what Dr. Kalua says, that this is not a wholesome indictment, because I know for a fact, and it has been stated here, one of the recommendations is that the entire board is disbanded. I don't think that is a matter of just a few individuals being indicted. I think it is a statement on the performance of the board. I think hearing from the statement that I was given, the management of KFS has also been condemned, and a number of individuals, even as we talk right now, are in what I can call an interdiction. So let me hasten to say that these two issues are serious indictment on both the management and the governance of KFS. So it runs down to the very basis of the organization. And therefore, in as much as we have to be careful and state categorically that we can't condemn the institution wholesome, I think this is a very serious outcome of the report. And on the one hand, one would want to not to hesitate or be mean, not to condemn, not to commend the task force for being brave and taking the bull by the horn, as it were. But it raises the second most important thing. What does it mean then for the officials who are affected, both who have served in the management of KFS and, of course, those who are in the governance or the governing body of KFS? I think that is also serious. But then there are a number of other important things to take account of, going back to the other part of your question. I think we've come a long way in this. Surely we didn't wake up one morning and realize that our rivers were failing and that drought had set in. And if you look at the process that led to the formation of the task force, it was a head-reeling kind of reactionary thing that definitely may have been called for if we found ourselves in a deep hole. But the question of forest management didn't catch us by surprise. These are matters that we have seen evolve over time, dating back to the time when we were talking of rain not coming from the forest, but coming from heaven. And this was told to us by the leadership of this country. So I don't know where matters changed overnight so that we found ourselves in such dire straits that we had to take such drastic action, recommend a task force to report within 14 days, amend its term to report within 30 days, and then come to 60 days. Definitely, for me, this is a study in how not to manage our forests. And if we are going to have such reactionary approaches to management of forests in this country, or any other resource for that matter, then I think it will be a matter of time. Down the line, we will find ourselves in the same mess that we seem to have found ourselves in. But let me just say the last thing. Sometimes they say, if you don't want to solve a problem, appoint a commission or a task force. I am happy that Dr. Kalua did reference some other task force reports that they had a look at. And for me, one thing that one must take account of, even as we commend the good statements that were made in respect of this particular report, is that we have been around for some time. And we know what happens when they say that no stone will be left unturned. And we want to put a challenge on the table. We hope that this time is going to be for real.
Right, so a challenge there being put on the table. And we had the Deputy President in his statement this morning saying that there is political will. So I guess it's all a matter of wait and see. And Dr. Kalua, last year, the former CS Environment, Judy Wahungu, spoke of a period of time between 2013 and 2017 where she said that the forest cover in the country had grown by 5.3%. And Sophia talked about it at the beginning of the show. What kind of rehabilitative measures were used during this period, and are there some, that can be borrowed at this time?
Thank you. I lost part of your question out of voice, but allow me first and foremost to respond to the issues that have been raised by my dear brother and friend. I will share the report with you so that you can be able to also catch up on some of the areas so that it is very clear. The fact that this report and the work was done within a very short time does not mean that there is anything that has been left undone. It is a very profound report, and now that since it is going to be a public document, you will be able to judge out of the information that we have received from Kenyans. But let me take us through one of the areas and laws and regulations that we have as a country. We have an Act of 2005, the Forest Act of 2005, and we also have one updated one of 2016. The 2005 Act, which talked about the logging, the penalties. I'm talking about penalties in this case, because when you have penalties and you know consequences of doing something wrong in law, then there is a consequence that gets there. Illegal logging in the 2005 Act attracted a penalty of 100,000 Kenya shillings or imprisonment of 5 years in jail. Could be 5 million, but I'm sure about the imprisonment of 5 years. Come the 2016 penalty, and the same the regulation now updated, you would expect that this would move from 1 year or 2 years to something more, but it was downgraded so that illegal loggers, when you are caught, you pay only 100,000 Kenya shillings or a 6 months jail term. Now, the same happens to the charcoal burning, where you are charged about up to 50,000 Kenya shillings or 1 year jail, and the new one talks about not more than 50,000 Kenya shillings or 6 months jail. Go to the Constitution of Kenya. It calls for 6 months jail is a petty offense, and therefore you cannot even be remanded. What does this mean to the Kenyan? It means you are caught with materials, illegal material from the forest, worth over millions of Kenya shillings, hundreds of millions or tens of millions, and all that you have to pay is 10,000 Kenya shillings, or 100,000 Kenya shillings. Where did that happen? How did it happen? Very well recommended by the forestry, very well recommended by the ministry to the parliament. The parliament deliberately downgraded this so that it all becomes, access of forest material becomes a petty offense. Now, you look at this, and it is in the report, and you'll be able to understand what we are talking of profound issues, and where we started hammering and getting ourselves wrong from the very inception. When you talk about the question you have raised about Madam Wahungu, she even went further to say issues of forestry are political. It is true, they are political, and it is coming out every day. But about this particular timing, it is about the good timing, the right timing, and it is actually the responsibility of us as Kenyans, because we are holding our politicians at a position that they can't remove themselves. We have settlements in the forests, people living in these places. When you touch them, they run to the politicians. They say, ukitutoa hapa tunateremka na kura zetu. What does the politician do? So you look at all this entire process, and you can actually find it in the Kenyan who is supposed to have protected all this. It's not about the leadership.
Right.
We are rotten from up to down, and it is our own way to start understanding where we need to start,
right,
and stop just pointing fingers at each other. Right. What we have done is just the right thing, according and based on the information that we had as a task force, and we believe, and we have no doubt whatsoever, in the affirmation and the confirmation by the Deputy President, the Minister, that this
right,
task force is definitely, the report is definitely going to be implemented as it were. It's not just another task force.
Right.
I mean...
Okay. All right, right. And Mr. Ochieng, let's talk about that 3-month ban and how effective do you think this really is? After the ban, then what? Do we risk seeing a period where the loggers then want to overcompensate for the time that this was banned? What do you think about this ban?
Well, let me hesitate to say that some wise man did say that if you find yourself in a hole, the first thing you do is to stop digging. And I want to look at the ban positively in a sense and say that if it was that serious that we really were in a hole, it was necessary to stop digging. And so we can give a positive spin to it. But let me hasten to add that I also know that such ad hoc administrative fiat kind of decisions are definitely the stuff in which poor management must be looked at. Because we didn't wake up one day and find that we were in dire straits regarding the situation of forests in this country. We have an institution, and this is a matter that over the years we have dealt with. Forest management probably has got as much attention as you would wish to see in any other important sector. In the early 90s, we were talking of forestry master plan, and we went round and we made a master plan for forests in Kenya, I think up to sometime 2025 or so. We are barely coming out of the process of formulating a national forest plan for Kenya under what we call the National Forest Program process. It is just last year we have a new forest legislation, Forest Conservation and Management Act 2018. So it is not as if we have not been dealing with these things. I think the management of KSS has always been on the board. One time you hear there is a forest ban, logging ban, something ban, and all of them normally tend to be made out of some ad hoc, as we used to say, roadside policy approaches to this thing. I think even the current management of KFS is not that old. It is fairly new. And there was a time that the institution did stay without a full board for quite a long time. And we have seen this happen from time to time in our natural resource sectors. I think it is high time, as I've said before, we put our money where our mouth is. Because we seem to speak well, but we do the opposite of what we are supposed to do. Let me hasten to say something in respect of this issue of penalties and offenses. Well, it is true, it sends a very strong message sometimes when we put stringent penalties. But the enforcement of our laws is only as good as the strength of our institutions and the resources we invest in doing that. Actually, in criminology, many times you find that you increase the problem if you increase penalties, because then you create an avenue for rent seeking. It is more or less like what we see in the traffic sector. Where if you say you are going to pay 10,000 or 100,000, then people find a way to get out of that quagmire by simply bribing the enforcement authorities. So it is with every sector in society. So actually some good recommendations have been put forward. We need to put resources there. We need to ensure that we streamline the management of institutions. And particularly right now, how the national government and county governments are going to collaborate to ensure that there is effectiveness in management of forests. Because ideally, we may be spending a lot of time talking about the role of Kenya Forest Service, but we are also forgetting that forestry is a devolved function as it stands now. So I've seen from what has been stated here and the little I've seen of the report, some good recommendation in respect of streamlining the functions of national and county government, but also importantly, understanding the ideals of decentralization and coordination in the environment sector. We know for a fact that certain institutions have ignored what NEMA does and what the Water Towers Authority does with impunity.
Right.
And there is quite a conflict in terms of institutional mandate and conflict of laws that comes with that. Because on the one hand, it is always the case that where there is a conflict between a resource-specific institution and a general institution that is in charge of overseeing or coordination, normally the specific institution or specific law seems to take precedence. And that is what they will run away with. They will tell you, yeah, but Nema, you are in charge of environment, we are in charge of forestry. And we see that from time to time play out in the management of national resources. So this will take more serious dialogue and agreement among the institutions involved, but also principally between the national government, county government, and of course the local communities that actually should be brought in strongly to be part and parcel of forest management in this country.
Right. And Dr. Kalua, let's talk about an issue that is not just an issue here in Kenya, but a global issue regarding, that poses really challenges to development and conservation. That is population growth. Because with growing population, then there's escalating needs for food, for space, for energy. What can local authorities and all entities that are involved in conservation do about population growth?
This goes hand in hand with the issue of resources and also consultation at every level so that there is access to activities and all the resources that are in the environment. One of the challenges that came out very clear, you find that Forest Service has got very few law enforcement capacity. So that we have one askari who is supposed to take care of the forest is in charge of 1,000 hectares. You wonder how can that happen even if we expected anything much. And therefore, and every question, and the Deputy President talked about this very candidly, how does it work? How do you sustain this? Because whenever an issue is raised, we don't have resources. Whenever an issue is raised, we cannot manage this. The resources that are coming into Kenya Forest Service on an annual basis is 3 billion Kenya shillings. And this normally goes into recurrent activities as opposed to development because they do not have another source of funding, and this is not very well managed, as it were, in the sense that it is, because they are expected to raise their own funds and be able to pay at the same time, just like an enterprise is expected to be done. And these are some of the issues. So resources are out of the payment for ecosystem services, so that there is, you can imagine how much water is extracted in the forest. How do we sustain that? And the Deputy President raised it very well today, and the Minister, so that there is that levy, and the report recommends a levy that is very clear, that brings out the funding that is sustainable, so that it doesn't depend today that Kalua is in charge of this or another person is in charge of this, that when people or institutions and the presidency or anyone changes, then you have a problem into posterity. So some of these things are what we must start dealing with so that there is good progress that is tangible in this entire process.
Right.
There is that challenge.
Right.
Yeah.
And indeed, so much we can talk about with regard to conservation and forest cover in the country, but yet again, so little time we have. So we've actually come to the end of the big story tonight. I want to thank my guest tonight, Dr. Isaac Kalua, who's the chairperson of the Green Africa Foundation and also a member of the Forest Taskforce that issued that report today, gave it to the CS Environment, and also Benson Ochieng, environmental lawyer, for that, those great insights into our big story tonight. That's where we wind up, and I'll see you next time. Have a good night. Thank you for watching.